Hey everyone, Jess here from J. Hoffman Knives. A while back on one of the forums, somebody had asked a question about the weight of G-Flex and having to know the weight difference between the epoxy and the hardener. And I was confused as to why you needed to know that. And then I learned that there's quite a few people out there that use a digital scale to get the proper mixture of the epoxy and the hardener. These mix a 1-to-1, which is kind of nice. It's easy to do, but I guess I was kind of surprised that there were that many people that were weighing it, because I've always used a syringe for that. Or this is an oral dispenser, same thing as a lower tip, slip tip syringe. So, okay, so first a little bit about the syringes. They're actually, I bought oral dispensers because the oral dispensers, when I bought them, were a little bit cheaper than the syringes. They're 5 cc or 5 milliliter. Milliliter and a cc are the same thing in a syringe. The key when you're going to buy these, you can get 3 milliliter, 1 milliliter, 10 milliliter, whatever size you get. The 5 just seems to work well for me. The key is that you get I believe it's pronounced Lauer slip tip. It's L-U-E-R, and that is the type of tip that it is. It's just this little nub that sticks out, the slip tip is. They also make a Lauer lock tip. You do not want the lock tip. It's just more difficult to get the epoxy and hardener out of the bottles. The slip tip seems to work really well. So when I told people on the forum that I didn't weigh mine, I used syringes to measure them, people thought that I was kind of stupid because it was expensive. That box of 100 syringes cost me, I believe, $9 on Amazon a couple of years ago. And this syringe right here has probably made 20 or 30 batches of epoxy. All you do is you put that tip into the end of the bottle. When you cut the bottle spout, just make sure you cut it about the same size as the tip. Don't cut it all the way back here where it's really wide, but just about the same size as the tip. And then just slowly draw your epoxy down in there. The slower you draw it, the less air bubbles you're going to get. You'll always get a couple of little bitty air bubbles in there, but it's nothing to worry about. This gets more difficult in the wintertime when the shop isn't quite as warm. This stuff doesn't flow quite as nicely. But so there I have 5 milliliters of epoxy. I do the same thing with the hardener. The key is don't ever cross-contaminate your hardener syringe with your epoxy bottle or vice versa. It's going to end up really bad, and you're going to end up ruining an entire bottle of hardener or a whole bottle of epoxy. So don't ever cross-contaminate. Use one syringe simply for hardener and one strictly for the epoxy. How much epoxy is the right amount when you're using syringes to measure? So what I usually do is, if I'm going to glue up 4 knives, I use 5 cc's of epoxy and 5 cc's of hardener. I always use 1 cc more than the number of knives that I have, and that seems to work for me. Not only does it give me a little bit extra, but it also gives me a little bit left over in my cup. And I can see when it cures and make sure that it cured properly. And that really is important. A few years back, I had been using Acroglass. I had been using Acroglass for years from Brownells. And then for some God unknown reason, they changed the formula and didn't tell anybody. And I started noticing issues in my mixing cup, that the epoxy was not curing as well as it used to. And I ended up dumping Acroglass, and I ended up going to G-Flex. I've been really happy with G-Flex ever since. It's been great stuff. and happy I made the change. But I always like having that little bit extra left over. If I am gluing up, say I've got 4 big chef's knives to glue up, I'm going to use more than 5 cc's. So at that point, I'll use, we'll say 7 cc's. And my syringe is only a 5 cc syringe. So what I'll do is if I'm going to use 7 cc's, I will do 5, and I'll squirt that into my mixing cup, and I'll do 2 of my epoxy and shoot that into the mixing cup. Then what I do is I've actually got 2 syringes for hardener. So I can mix up, I can draw out 5 cc's of hardener in one and 2 cc's of hardener in the other. And when it comes time to mix my hardener with my epoxy, I can shoot them all in at the same time. And it just, to me, it makes sense to do it that way, to just use the extra syringe. And that's seemed to work well for me. Another thing I do before I put my hardener in, after I've put my epoxy in the cup, and before I put my hardener in, is I put in some of this. And this I got from Brownells, and it is little bitty fiberglass fibers. And it is designed to be used with Acrylic glass, but it works very well with the G-Flex, and it adds a little bit extra strength to the epoxy. Think of it as rebar in concrete, or actually they do put the fiberglass fibers in concrete also now. So that's what it is. I'll put just a pinch of this in there. I think this bag was $15 and I bought it maybe 10 years ago. So it doesn't take much and it'll last you damn near forever. So not only are the syringes great for measuring your epoxy, which is the main reason that I got them in here, they also work for other things around the shop. This one is filled with buffing compound. I can keep it in there and put this on a knife and use it to buff. It's really handy compared to the big bottle that it comes in. This is my tap paste or cutting fluid. Again, it's really nice to be able to pinpoint right at the hole you're going to drill and be able to put a dollop of this in there. So the syringes have other uses. This box of syringes, I don't know if I had said, was I think about $9. There were 100 of them in here, and you can see how many are in there yet. And I bought this box a couple of years ago. So if you're going to switch over to it, I guess I recommend it. It's worked really well for me. I don't have to worry about measuring scales and stuff like that. It's being measured by volume, and it's actually the correct volume when you're measuring. So make sure you get the lower slip tip, not the lock tip, and I get the 5 cc. You can get whatever cc you want. The key is don't ever cross-contaminate them between the hardener and the epoxy, and they'll last a long time. This set of syringes, like I said, probably about 30 batches of epoxy I've mixed up. Sometimes I just throw them out just because they start to get gummy, but they work pretty well. I have tried cleaning them. Don't even waste your time. It's a pain in the ass and doesn't ever seem to work. So if you have any questions about epoxy glue up, let me know. I'd appreciate feedback. Or if you have a different way of doing it or a way that you think is better, I'd love to hear it. Thank you much.